I always believed that my marriage with Lucas was unshakable. Sure, we weren't perfect, but who can really claim that kind of ideal? Life just moves along, routines settle in, and over time, the passion tends to fade. It's all part of the natural course, right? Or was I simply trying to convince myself of that? But that evening, when Lucas was late at work once again, I felt something unfamiliar stir within me. It wasn't frustration about his absence, nor was I upset by our plans being disrupted. It was something else. A deep sense of emptiness. Like I was standing on the edge of a vast void, and everything that once connected me to him was ready to snap. As I walked upstairs to our bedroom, everything looked the same as it had in the morning, but that emptiness seemed to grow stronger. I sat on the bed, closed my eyes, and realized the painful truth. I was alone. Not in a physical sense, Lucas was still around, even if not always, but in my heart. I had been alone for a long time, and the realization hit me like a bolt of lightning, striking deep within me. Suddenly, memories of our early days together flooded back, how we couldn't get enough of each other. He had been so full of life, so passionate. Where had all that gone? The sound of the phone, ringing, jolted me from my thoughts. It was Ethan, Lucas's son from his first marriage. He didn't often reach out to me directly. He usually spoke to Lucas. So why was he calling me? "Hey, how's it going?" His voice was warm, but there was something in it that made my heart race. "It's been a while since we caught up. I thought maybe you'd like to grab a coffee and chat," Ethan suggested. "Why not?" I thought, feeling a strange shift in my tension towards curiosity. And in that moment, I sensed that this wasn't just about my marriage or my life. Something much bigger was starting to unfold. Meeting Ethan was nothing more than a casual coffee date at a small cafe, or so I thought. As I made my way there, I realized I'd known him for years. Lucas's son had always been a bit distant, staying in his father's shadow. I never thought of him as someone I could have a deep conversation with. But maybe that was the very reason I agreed to meet him. When I walked into the cafe, Ethan was already sitting at a table, absent-mindedly stirring his cup. He looked different, calmer, more self-assured. Not at all like the reserved young man who usually stayed in the background when his father was around. I smiled, trying to shake off the nerves. It was just coffee, I reminded myself. "Sophie, I'm really glad you came," he said, smiling as if genuinely happy to see me. "How've you been? You seem a little tired." "Oh, just the usual," I said, brushing off his concern. There was too much weighing on me, and I wasn't about to unload it on Ethan. But he didn't let up. "It's about your dad, isn't it? You two haven't been getting along lately, have you?" His voice carried a quiet empathy, and I realized he'd been paying attention to us more than I'd realized. "You've noticed?" I asked, my voice softer as I lowered my gaze to my cup. "We've become almost strangers," I admitted. "He's always working, and when he's home, we barely talk." "It's not your fault," Ethan said unexpectedly, reaching across the table to take my hand. I froze. His touch was so unexpected, yet so calm. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a weight of understanding. "Thank you, Ethan," I said, my voice tinged with gratitude. In that moment, I just wanted someone to hear me, and he was that person. We talked for another hour, maybe more. Time seemed to slip away, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of relief. Ethan turned out to be far more thoughtful and engaging than I had expected. As we left the cafe, he stopped suddenly and turned to face me. His expression was serious, and I felt the air shift with a new tension. "Sophie," he said, his voice low and filled with unspoken meaning. "You deserve more. Do you realize that?" My heart skipped a beat. This was the moment everything could change, but I wasn't ready for what came next. Ethan leaned in slowly and, without a word, kissed me gently on the cheek. It wasn't passionate. There were no wild emotions, but it was warm, tender, and it sent a shiver down my spine. The simplicity of it was what made it feel so much more than just a friendly gesture. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something huge, but I didn't know how to move forward. I turned away and left, the question echoing in my mind. What was that? After meeting Ethan, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The kiss, the brief touch, was so subtle, yet it felt like it had left a lasting mark. It wasn't a big deal. Or was it? Why did I feel so guilty toward Lucas? Why did I have this growing sense that I had crossed some kind of invisible line? Lucas was still wrapped up in his work, and our evenings passed in silence, as if we were living in separate worlds. But now, something was different. I found myself comparing him to Ethan. His indifference to our relationship stood in stark contrast to the care and attention I was receiving from his son. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something inside me was changing. One evening, when Lucas was again glued to his phone, I reached my breaking point. "Lucas, are we ever going to talk?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I could no longer hold back. He looked up, taken aback by my sudden outburst. But then, with a sigh, he replied, "What do you want to talk about, Sophie? I work all day to make sure we're okay. Isn't that enough?" I froze. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment to lay everything out on the table. But suddenly, I didn't even know where to begin. I felt overwhelmed by hopelessness. Something had broken between us, but I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. "Everything's fine," I muttered, feeling a surge of anger inside me. He didn't understand. He didn't want to. Days passed and I saw Ethan again. This time, he offered to help with a project I'd been putting off for ages. Everything seemed to unfold so naturally. We sat in his apartment, sipping tea and chatting about trivial things. I felt more at ease with him than I ever did with Lucas. With every word Ethan spoke, I could feel the walls I had built around myself beginning to crumble. "Sophie, you deserve more than just being a shadow to your father," Ethan said suddenly, his tone turning serious. His words hit me like a punch, as if he had uncovered my deepest, most hidden thoughts. "I'm not a shadow," I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt a tightening in my chest. I knew he was right. When it was time for me to leave, Ethan stepped closer, closing the gap between us. For a moment, I froze. And in that fleeting instant, everything became painfully clear. A thread of tension stretched between us, and I could feel it ready to snap. Then Ethan kissed me again. But this time, it wasn't just a light touch. This kiss was filled with inevitability. It wasn't fiery or full of passion. It was a step into the unknown, a step into the abyss I had been slowly falling into. My heart pounded so loudly, I couldn't even hear my own thoughts as I pulled away. My mind was a whirlwind. What had I just done? After that kiss, I left Ethan's apartment in a state of complete chaos. It wasn't something I'd anticipated, but at the same time, it felt like exactly what I had been longing for. It felt as though the world around me was crumbling, and yet, I couldn't stop it. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but a voice inside me kept justifying each step. "You deserve to be happy," it whispered. At home, nothing had changed. Lucas was still lost in his work, and I moved through our house like a ghost, trying to make sense of everything that was happening to me. But now, when I looked at him, I couldn't see him the same way anymore. All the things that once connected us felt so distant that I began to question if they had ever been real. Maybe we had both been playing roles in a story that wasn't our own. One evening, I found myself alone at home when I noticed Lucas had left his laptop open. It seemed odd. He was always protective of his personal things. Curiosity stirred inside me, something I had been trying to suppress. I had never gone through his phone or computer before, but this time, it felt like fate was pushing me. I opened the laptop, and what I saw turned my world upside down. A conversation between Lucas and Ethan. But it wasn't just any conversation.
They were talking about me.
Lucas knew something was happening between us, and the worst part? Not only did he know, but it seemed like he had been keeping an eye on me as I slid deeper into this infidelity. I read every word with trembling hands. Lucas had done nothing to stop it. In fact, it seemed as though he had deliberately created the circumstances that made me feel so alone, pushing me to seek comfort in his son. He had orchestrated this all along. I whispered the painful truth to myself. Lucas knew about our meetings and had let it happen. I couldn't believe it. The man I had shared so many years with had treated me so coldly. He knew I was struggling, knew I felt abandoned. And instead of helping me, he had allowed me to fall into this abyss. I had to talk to Ethan. Maybe he didn't know that Lucas had been watching us all along. But then again, did he? That question haunted me. The next day, I couldn't think straight. Everything I had discovered kept swirling in my mind, creating an overwhelming noise. Lucas had known everything from the start, and worse, Ethan might have been a part of it. The thought tore me apart from the inside. I called Ethan, asking if we could meet. We needed to talk, to clear the air. He agreed, and we met again at the same cafe where it all began. But this time, everything felt different. The air between us was heavy, like a dark cloud hanging above us. I found the conversation between you and Lucas. I blurted out before I could stop myself, my emotions spilling out. Did you know? Were you part of this? Ethan froze. His face darkened, and I could already tell what his answer would be before he spoke. It's not what you think, Sophie, he began, but there was uncertainty in his voice. I didn't want it to end up like this.
I really cared about you. Ikare.
I felt a rush of anger. Then why? Why did you get involved in this? Why didn't you tell me? Lucas knew everything. Ethan sighed, his hands covering his face in frustration. He looked lost, and for a moment, I saw the person he had been when we first started meeting. A young man searching for his place in life. But that didn't excuse what he had done. Lucas thought you didn't deserve him, he began quietly. He thought sooner or later, you'd do something. He trailed off, as if afraid to continue.
It was his test.
He wanted to see how far you would go.
And I
got caught up in it, without fully understanding what I was doing. Ethan's words hit me like a hammer. Lucas had been testing me all this time, using his own son to watch how I slowly fell into this infidelity. I felt trapped, with no way out. My life, my trust, everything, had been nothing but a game to him. I can't take this anymore, I whispered, feeling tears well up in my eyes. This isn't life. It's a nightmare. Ethan reached out to me, his eyes full of regret. Sophie,
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have gotten involved.
It all went too far. But I really feel something real for you. I wasn't just following my father's plan. His words were like a knife twisting deeper. I didn't know whether to believe him or not. Maybe there was some truth in what he said. Maybe he really felt something for me all along. But at this point, it didn't matter. This nightmare had destroyed everything I once held true. I rose from the table, the weight of what had just happened settling on me. I had to go. Ethan quickly followed. Sophie, wait. I can't lose you like this, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. But I couldn't bear to hear it anymore. As I stepped out of the cafe, he reached for my hand and kissed me once more. This time, the kiss felt different, desperate, as though it was the last thread of connection between us. It was a final gesture, filled with sorrow and regret, as though he finally realized that everything had already slipped through his fingers. I pulled away, the fire of frustration and confusion burning inside me. That kiss couldn't undo what was done. I walked home, feeling as if the world had shifted beneath me. When I walked through the door, Lucas was there, sitting on the couch with his phone, as if nothing had changed. As if nothing had ever been different. But I knew the truth now. Everything we had built, every memory that had once seemed genuine, was part of his design. A piece of the game he had been playing all along. We need to talk, I said as I entered the room. My heart pounded, my chest tight, and the floor beneath me seemed to tilt. Lucas slowly looked up, his face expressionless, his eyes not giving away a single emotion. He didn't look surprised, didn't look concerned. He just stared, calm and detached. I know, I said, my voice a whisper, barely above a breath. I know about you and Ethan. I found the conversation. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, almost imperceptible, a glimmer of something that might have been relief. It was as if this was the conversation he had been expecting. And what do you want now? He asked, his tone flat, almost bored. You already know everything. I'm not going to lie to you. I stepped forward, the tremble in my hands betraying me. I had no idea what I was hoping for from this confrontation. Perhaps an apology, an explanation, something to hold on to. But instead, his indifference was like a slap in the face.
Why?
I demanded, my voice shaking. Why did you do this? Why didn't you stop me when you knew what was happening? Lucas stood up slowly, his face as hard as stone. Because I knew from the start, Sophie, he said coldly. You weren't who you pretended to be. I saw it happening. I saw how you were changing. You weren't the person I married anymore. And when I saw how easily you could be tempted, I knew it wasn't worth saving. His words hit me like a punch, knocking the breath from my chest. He had been watching me, studying me like some kind of experiment. And Ethan, his own son, had been pulled into this mess. So, this had all been some sort of game to him? My heart shattered as I realized what he had done. You were just waiting for me to fall, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You fell long before you think, he replied, his tone sharp and final. It was inevitable. I stared at him, looking for any trace of remorse in his eyes, but there was nothing. Just emptiness. Then what now? I asked, the tears rising but still held back. I wasn't going to let him see me break down. He chuckled, a low sound devoid of humor. Now you choose. You leave or you stay. But whatever you decide, I won't be the one to catch you when you fall. I stood frozen, the finality of his words hitting me like a wave. All the memories, all the years we spent together, felt like they had just crumbled to dust. You won't even give me a chance? I whispered, my heart sinking. A chance. His voice was icy, indifferent. Sophie, you already made your choice a long time ago. I couldn't look at him anymore. I turned away, desperate for answers that wouldn't come, struggling to comprehend how we had ended up here. I had been deceived, played by both Ethan and Lucas. They were playing their games, and I had been nothing but a pawn. The next morning, I packed my things. No words, no apologies. Everything had already been said. I left, knowing that the weight of what had happened, the weight of my own decisions, would follow me for a long time. As I closed the door behind me, it was as if nothing in the world had changed. I wasn't walking away from the life I knew. I was walking away from a lie that had already died a long time ago.